3 wolves were chained in the jungle crying for help. What this baby did made everyone cry. Lightning split the night sky as rain hammered against the roof of the Blackwood family cabin. The storm had rolled in from the mountains without warning, transforming the peaceful evening into a symphony of howling wind and crashing thunder. Inside, 4-year-old Noah sat by the large bay window, his small fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching raindrops race down the pane. If you're about to listen to this incredible story, make sure to like, share, and comment where you're watching from. What happens next will change your perspective on the connection between children and wild animals forever. The Blackwood family had moved to the edge of Whisper Woods National Forest just 3 months ago. James Blackwood, a retired Marine Corps veteran, had sought solace in the isolation after his last tour in Afghanistan left him with both physical and invisible scars. His wife, Elena, had supported the decision, hoping the tranquility of forest living would help heal the family. Their son, Noah, unnaturally quiet and observant for his age, had adapted to their new life with surprising ease, spending hours exploring the woodland around their property under his parents' watchful eyes. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting Noah's face in stark relief. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something beyond the storm's fury. "Daddy," he whispered, turning away from the window. "Someone's calling for help." James looked up from the fireplace where he had been stoking the flames. The electricity had gone out an hour ago, leaving them dependent on the fire's warmth and light. Elena paused her knitting, exchanging a concerned glance with her husband. "It's just the wind, buddy," James reassured him, his voice carrying the gravelly quality it had acquired since returning from overseas. "This storm is playing tricks on your ears." Noah shook his head with a certainty that seemed incongruous with his tender age. "No, Daddy. They're crying. They're scared and hurt." His eyes welled with tears. "They need us." Elena set aside her knitting and crossed the room to her son, kneeling beside him at the window. "Who needs us, sweetheart?" she asked gently, brushing a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "The wolves," Noah answered simply, pointing toward the dense line of trees that marked the beginning of the true wilderness beyond their property. 3 of them. They're trapped, and they can't get free. James and Elena exchanged another look, this one tinged with deeper concern. Noah had always been an unusual child, sensitive to things others missed, but this was different. Wolves hadn't been spotted in Whisper Woods for decades, according to the locals. The few predators remaining kept to the higher elevations, far from human habitation. "Noah, honey, there aren't any wolves near our home," Elena explained patiently. "They live much deeper in the mountains." "They're there," Noah insisted, turning back to the window. His small hand formed a fist against the glass. "They're chained. Up. The big gray one is hurt really bad. The white one is trying to protect the baby." A chill ran down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the draft seeping through the window frame. Noah had never shown interest in making up stories before. His imagination, while vibrant, typically remained firmly rooted in reality. James approached the window, his movements slightly uneven due to the prosthetic leg he'd worn since Afghanistan. He placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Buddy, how do you know about wolves being chained up?" "I can hear them," Noah replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Not with my ears. In here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "They're scared of the thunder. They can't run away." The conviction in his voice gave James pause. Since his return from combat, he had developed a heightened sense for when something wasn't right, a survival instinct that had saved his life. more than once in the field, and right now that instinct was humming, not with danger necessarily, but with the certainty that something unusual was happening. "Where exactly are they, Noah?" he asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to attentive. Noah pressed his face closer to the glass, squinting through the rain-streaked darkness. "By the big fallen tree near the creek that goes under the rocks." He turned to his father, eyes wide and pleading. "We have to help them, Daddy. The man who put them there is a bad man." "What man?" Elena asked sharply, her protective instincts flaring. "Noah, has someone been in the woods? Have you seen a stranger?" Noah shook his head. "I haven't seen him, but the wolves know him. He put the chains on them. He comes to hurt them." James straightened, moving toward the cabinet where he kept his emergency gear. The rational part of his brain told him this was likely just a child's imagination, perhaps influenced by the violent storm. But the part of him that had learned to trust instinct, to act rather than analyze when lives might be at stake, was already preparing. "James," Elena said, her voice low with warning, "you're not actually considering going out in this storm based on this?" James paused, one hand on the cabinet door. "Something's not right, Elena. If there's even a small chance that that our 4-year-old son has somehow psychically located abused wolves in the middle of a forest during a thunderstorm?" Her voice betrayed her frustration, but beneath it lay fear. Fear for her husband venturing into dangerous conditions. Fear for what Noah's strange behavior might mean. "I can show you," Noah said quietly. "I can take you to them." "Absolutely not," Elena responded immediately. "No one is going into those woods tonight, especially not our son." The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. James looked between his wife and son, torn between logic and intuition. Then he made a decision. "I'll go check." "Alone," he stated firmly. "Noah, you stay here with your mother where it's safe. If, and that's a big if, I find anything, I'll come right back." "James," Elena protested. "I'll be fine," he assured her. "I know these woods better than anyone. I've hiked every trail within 5 miles of this cabin. If Noah is describing the fallen oak by Eagle Creek, that's only about 20 minutes from here." He returned to the cabinet, retrieving a waterproof jacket, a powerful flashlight, a first aid kit, and his hunting knife. Old habits from his military days kicked in as he mentally prepared for a reconnaissance mission. He checked the batteries in the flashlight, secured the knife to his belt, and pulled a pair of wire cutters from his toolbox as an afterthought. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, call Ranger Station 4, he instructed Elena, programming the number into her phone. "Ask for Mike Tanner. Tell him I'm checking something suspicious near Eagle Creek." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, but she nodded. 2 hours. Not a minute more. James knelt in front of Noah, who had remained by the window, his eyes fixed on the dark forest beyond. "I need you to be very specific, buddy. Tell me exactly where to look." Noah turned to his father, his expression serious beyond his years. "Follow the path to where we saw the deer family last week, then go left at the big rock that looks like a turtle. The fallen tree is just past the place where the creek goes underground. They're underneath it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Hurry, Daddy. The baby wolf is very cold." James felt another chill at his son's detailed directions and the certainty with which he delivered them. He gave Noah a quick hug, kissed Elena, and headed for the door. "Be careful," Elena called after, him unable to hide the tremor in her voice. "Always am," James replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. The moment he stepped onto the porch, the storm enveloped him. Rain lashed at his face, and the wind tore at his jacket. Lightning forked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the forest edge in stark white light before plunging it back into darkness. James switched on his flashlight and descended the porch steps, his prosthetic leg sinking slightly in the mud. The storm's fury seemed to increase as he approached the tree line, as if nature itself was warning him to turn back. For a brief moment, he considered doing just that. The idea that his son could somehow sense suffering animals in the distance was far-fetched at best, delusional at worst. And yet, Noah had never led them astray before. There was the time he had insisted they check the hollow log near their previous home in Colorado, leading them to discover an injured fox that later recovered at a wildlife rehabilitation center, and the inexplicable incident when Noah had awakened screaming about Grandpa falling, only for them to receive a call 20 minutes later that Elena's father had suffered a stroke. These memories steeled James's resolve as he entered the forest, following the narrow trail that wound between ancient trees. Despite the darkness and the storm, he moved with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the terrain. His military training had taught him to map landscapes in his mind, to notice landmarks and calculate distances, even in the most adverse conditions. The path curved around a massive boulder, the Turtle Rock Noah had mentioned, and James turned left as instructed. The rainfall grew slightly less intense beneath the canopy of trees, but water still dripped from leaves and branches, soaking through his jacket. The beam of his flashlight bounced off wet trunks and undergrowth, creating ghostly shadows that seemed to move and shift independently. After 15 minutes of careful hiking, James heard the rush of Eagle Creek, swollen with rainwater and moving more swiftly than usual. He followed the sound until he reached the spot where the creek disappeared beneath a rock formation, a natural limestone bridge that Noah found endlessly fascinating during their family hikes. Just beyond this landmark lay a massive fallen oak, its huge root system exposed like the fingers of a giant hand reaching for the sky. The tree had come down during a storm the previous autumn, creating a natural shelter beneath its elevated trunk and branches. James approached cautiously, sweeping his flashlight beam across the area. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the expected forest debris, scattered leaves, and mud. He was about to conclude that Noah's imagination had indeed gotten the better of him when a sound froze him in place. It wasn't the rush of the creek, or the patter of rain, or the distant rumble of thunder. It was a low, pained whimper, distinctly animal in origin. James directed his flashlight beneath the fallen oak toward the source of the sound. The beam illuminated a sight that stopped his breath. 3 wolves were indeed chained to the base of the fallen tree. One large grey male with a scarred muzzle lay on its side, its breathing laboured, one leg clearly broken and poorly splintered with crude materials. Beside it, a smaller white female stood protectively over what appeared to be a wolf pup, no more than a few months old. All 3 were secured with heavy chains that had cut into their fur, leaving raw wounds where they had struggled against their restraints. The white female bared her teeth at James, placing herself between him and the injured male. The pup cowered, behind her emitting small, frightened whines. Despite her defensive posture, James could see that the female was severely malnourished, her ribs visible beneath her dirty white coat. "Jesus Christ," James whispered, his mind reeling. Noah had been right, exactly right about everything, the location, the wolves, their conditions, even the colors. The shocking discovery left James momentarily paralyzed with questions. How had Noah known? Who would chain wild wolves here, and for what purpose? The cruelty of the scene ignited a slow, burning anger in his chest, reminiscent of the righteous fury he had sometimes felt in combat when witnessing unnecessary suffering. Pushing these questions aside for later, James focused on the immediate problem. The wolves, particularly the injured grey male, needed help, but approaching 3 terrified wild predators would be dangerous, even if they weren't in a defensive position. His military training had prepared him for many scenarios, but wolf rescue had never been among them. The white female growled as James took a step closer, the sound barely audible above the storm, but unmistakably threatening. The pup whimpered and pressed closer to her side. "It's okay," James said softly, knowing his words meant nothing to the animals, but hoping his tone might convey his intentions. "I'm not going to hurt you." He crouched down, making himself smaller and less threatening, while keeping a safe distance. The grey male wolf's eyes opened slightly at the sound of his voice, revealing amber irises clouded with pain. There was something in that gaze, an intelligence and wariness born of suffering at human hands, that struck James deeply. While maintaining eye contact with the wolves, James slowly reached for his phone. He needed to document this before doing anything else. The flash from his camera caused the white female to growl again, but she didn't lunge, constrained by her chain and unwilling to leave the pup unprotected. As James took several photos from different angles, he noticed details that made his blood run cold. These weren't just chains haphazardly wrapped around the wolves. They were specially designed restraints with padlocks, the kind used for large dogs, but modified with additional links to accommodate the wolves' larger necks. This wasn't opportunistic cruelty. It was premeditated and systematic. Even more disturbing were the remnants of what looked like a primitive camp nearby. Empty food containers, cigarette butts, and what appeared to be a bloodied knife, partially covered by leaves. James's combat-honed senses went on high alert. Whoever had done this might still be in the area, might return at any moment. The grey male wolf attempted to rise but collapsed again, with a pained yelp that made James wince in sympathy. The splint on its leg was clearly amateurish, dirty bandages wrapped around 2 uneven branches, doing more harm than good. Without proper treatment, infection would set in, if it hadn't already. James made a decision. He couldn't leave the wolves here, at the mercy of whoever had imprisoned them and the worsening storm. But he also couldn't free them on his own. The injured male would need proper medical transport, and approaching the defensive female closely enough to cut her chain would be too dangerous. He needed help, professional help. Pulling out his phone again, James was relieved to find he still had reception, though barely. He dialed the number for Ranger Station 4. Whisperwood's North Station, Ranger Tanner speaking, came the familiar voice of his friend. "Mike, it's James Blackwood," he said, speaking quietly but clearly. "I've got a situation about a mile east of my property near Eagle Creek. I've found 3 wolves, 2 adults and a pup, chained under a fallen oak. One's badly injured. I need assistance with wildlife rescue, maybe a vet if you can find one willing to come out in this weather." There was a pause on the line. "Wolves? Chained?" Mike sounded incredulous. "James, there haven't been confirmed wolf sightings in Whisperwoods for years." "Well, I'm confirming one now," James replied grimly. 3, actually, and they didn't chain themselves up. "Are you absolutely sure they're wolves, not large coyotes or feral dogs?" I know the difference, Mike. These are wolves. Grey timber wolf and what looks like an Arctic or possibly a wolf-dog hybrid female. The pup seems mixed. Another pause. This doesn't make sense. Who would... That's what I'd like to know, James interrupted. But right now, these animals need help. The male has a broken leg with a botched splint. All three are malnourished and have wounds from the chains. Okay, Mike said, his tone shifting to professional efficiency. Stay where you are. I'll call Dr. Reyes. She's worked with predator species before. We can be there in about 45 minutes. If the roads aren't washed out, I'll be here, James confirmed. Approach from the west side of Eagle Creek, and Mike, whoever did this might come back. Bring your sidearm. Copy that, Mike responded, the gravity of the situation apparent. In his voice, 45 minutes. Stay safe, James. The call ended, and James pocketed his phone, turning his attention back to the wolves. The white female hadn't relaxed her guard, but she had stopped growling, watching him with intelligent, wary eyes. The pup had fallen silent, huddled against her side. The grey male's breathing seemed more laboured than before, his eyes closed again. James settled on a fallen log several yards away, close enough to keep watch over the wolves, but far enough to avoid stressing them further. As he waited for help to arrive, his mind returned to the inexplicable accuracy of Noah's knowledge. His son had somehow known exactly where to find these wolves, had described their colours and situation with perfect clarity, despite never leaving the cabin. The storm continued around them, though the thunder had grown more distant. Rain dripped through the canopy, creating a gentle patter that contrasted with the tension of the scene. In the dim glow of his flashlight, James watched the white female gently nuzzle the pup, offering comfort despite her own distress. The simple act of maternal protection reminded James of Elena and Noah, waiting anxiously back at the cabin. He needed to let them know what he'd found. Pulling out his phone once more, he composed a quick text to Elena. Noah was right. Found 3 wolves exactly where he said. Called for help. I'm safe. We'll explain everything later. As he hit send, a subtle movement in the underbrush beyond the fallen oak caught his attention. James tensed, hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. The white female wolf had noticed it too, her ears perked forward, body coiled with renewed tension. For a moment everything was still. Then a branch snapped in the darkness beyond his flashlight's beam. James rose slowly to his feet, senses on high alert. Someone was watching them from the shadows of the forest. The wolves' captor had returned. James remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fallen oak. The white female wolf's ears were pinned back, her body tense, as she sensed the same presence he did. The injured grey male struggled to lift his head, a low growl rumbling in his throat, despite his weakened state. "Who's there?" James called out, his voice steady and commanding. The voice of a Marine who had faced far worse than whatever lurked in these woods. "Show yourself." The silence that followed was broken only by the persistent patter of rain and the occasional distant thunder. Then a twig snapped, and a beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a tall figure moving cautiously through the underbrush. "Identify yourself," James ordered, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. The figure paused, then stepped forward into the overlapping glow of their flashlights. It was a man, probably in his late 50s, wearing a Forest Service uniform beneath a rain poncho. His weathered face showed surprise, then wariness. "Marshal Reynolds," he said, raising a hand in a gesture that was both greeting and surrender. "District Wildlife Officer. I could ask you the same question, being out here in this weather." James didn't relax his stance. Something felt off about the timing of this encounter. James Blackwood. I live in the cabin about a mile west of here. I'm reporting an animal welfare situation. He gestured toward the chained wolves. Care to explain? This? Reynolds' gaze shifted to the wolves, his expression carefully neutral. Ah, you found our problem wolves. I've been tracking them for weeks. Problem wolves, James echoed, skepticism evident in his tone. They look more like victims than problems to me, the wildlife officer sighed, moving closer with slow, deliberate steps. It's a complicated situation. These aren't ordinary wolves. They're part of a failed rehabilitation program, wolves that were raised in captivity and proved too dangerous to release properly. The male attacked a rancher's dog last month. So, your solution was to chain them up and leave them to die? James couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. Reynolds frowned. Of course not. They were supposed to be transported to a specialized facility in Montana. I secured them temporarily while arranging transport, but with the storm... He trailed, off, gesturing vaguely at the weather. James studied the man, searching for signs of deception. His years in combat had taught him to read people in high-pressure situations, and right now his instincts were screaming that Reynolds wasn't being truthful. The makeshift camp, the crude splint, the bloodied knife, none of it aligned with official wildlife management protocols. You splinted the male's leg, James asked, nodding toward the injured wolf. Reynolds hesitated just a fraction too long. Had to. He broke it trying to escape. Would have been better to euthanize him, but the female and pup are bonded to him. Interesting approach to wildlife rehabilitation, James commented dryly. I've already called Ranger Station 4, Mike Tanner, and a veterinarian are on their way. The change in Reynolds was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes, a shift in posture that James recognized as the precursor to either flight or aggression. That wasn't necessary, Reynolds said, his voice hardening. This is my jurisdiction, my operation. Tanner has no authority here. Funny, I thought animal cruelty fell under everyone's jurisdiction, James replied, not backing down. Those chains have cut into their flesh. The male's splint is causing more harm than good. They're malnourished and terrified. Whatever operation this is, it's over. Reynolds's hand moved to his hip, where James now noticed a holstered sidearm. You're interfering with official wildlife management, Mr. Blackwood. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, now. The standoff was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the chained wolves. The white female had begun pulling frantically at her. Restraints, her attention focused not on the two men, but on something beyond them in the forest. The pup whimpered, pressing closer to her side. James turned slightly, keeping Reynolds in his peripheral vision while scanning the tree line. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a small figure emerged from between the trees, illuminated by the beam of a flashlight that seemed too large for the tiny hands that held it. "Noah!" James exclaimed, shock and fear coursing through him. "What are you doing here?" His 4-year-old son stood at the edge of the clearing, drenched from the rain, his yellow rubber boots caked with mud. His face was set in an expression of such determined focus that he looked nothing like the child James had left at the cabin less than an hour ago. "Noah, go back right now. It's not safe here." James started toward his son, but Reynolds's voice stopped him. "That's your boy." The wildlife officer's tone had changed, interest replacing hostility. How did he find his way here in this weather? Noah ignored both of them, walking straight toward the chained wolves with no sign of fear. The white female had stopped struggling, her eyes fixed on the approaching child. To James's astonishment, her aggressive posture melted away, replaced by an almost submissive stance. Ears forward, tail slightly lowered. "Noah, stop!" James called out, panic rising in his chest at the sight of his son approaching wild predators. He moved to intercept him, but Reynolds was closer. The wildlife officer reached for Noah, grabbing his arm. "Hold on there, little man. Those are dangerous animals." What happened next occurred so quickly that James would later struggle to piece it together in proper sequence. The moment Reynolds touched Noah, the white female wolf lunged to the full extent of her chain, teeth bared in sudden fury. The pup darted forward with her, adding its high-pitched snarls to her deeper growls. Even the injured male struggled to his feet, pain forgotten in the face of perceived threat. Noah jerked away from Reynolds' grip with surprising strength for a child his size. "Don't touch me!" he shouted, his voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible coming from a 4-year-old. "You're the one who hurt them." Reynolds stepped back, momentarily startled by the child's accusation and the wolf's reaction. His hand moved toward his holstered weapon again, and James felt a surge of protective rage. "Touch that gun, and it will be the last thing you do," James warned, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. His voice was low and deadly, serious, the voice of a man who had seen combat and was prepared to do whatever necessary to protect his son. Reynolds froze, reassessing the situation. His gaze shifted between James, Noah, and the agitated wolves. Calculation played across his features, followed by a decision. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just concerned for the boy's safety. Wolves are unpredictable, especially in these conditions." Noah had reached the chained wolves. Instead of attacking, the white female lowered her head, allowing the boy to place his small hand on her wet fur. The pup approached cautiously, sniffing at Noah's boots and legs. Even the injured male had calmed, watching the child with what James could only describe as recognition. "They know him," James murmured, astonishment temporarily overriding his concern. "How is that possible?" Reynolds' expression had grown tight, his eyes darting between Noah and the wolves with growing discomfort. "The boy needs to step away from those animals, now." "Daddy!" Noah called, his voice steady despite the rain soaking his clothes and hair. "This man is lying. He's the bad man I told you about. He hurts the wolves and takes their babies." James looked at his son, then at Reynolds, whose face had drained of color. The pieces were beginning to align in a disturbing pattern. The crude camp, the bloodied knife, the botched splint that no wildlife professional would have applied. "You're not with Forest Service, are you?" James asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Who are you? What are you doing with these wolves?" Reynolds's hand twitched toward his weapon again, but James was faster. With the reflexes honed by years of military training, he closed the remaining distance between them and immobilized the other man's arm in a painful hold. "Don't," James advised quietly. "I've taken down men twice your size with my bare hands. Answer the question." Reynolds struggled briefly, then went still, a calculating look replacing his fear. "Fine. You want the truth? There's money in wolves. Big money. Especially white ones like her." He jerked his chin toward the female. "Collectors will pay 6 figures for a pure Arctic wolf. The pup is worth almost as much, half wolf, half husky, with those blue eyes. Exotic pet market eats that up." James felt sick. "You're a poacher." "Wildlife redistribution specialist," Reynolds corrected with a humorless smile. "The grey male was a bonus. Wandered into my trap while I was tracking the female. His pelt alone would fetch a decent price, but he's proven more useful for breeding. You've been keeping them captive to breed them." The pieces fell into place in James's mind. "That's why the pup is a hybrid. You crossed the Arctic female with a domestic dog." Reynolds shrugged as much as James's hold would allow. "Business is business. Look, there's room for us both to profit here. The market's huge. Europe, Asia, private collectors who don't ask questions. The pup alone would set you up for months." "You disgust me," James said flatly. "And you're done. The Rangers will be here soon, and you'll explain everything to them." A sly smile spread across Reynolds's weathered face. "They won't find anything to charge me with. No permits for wolf handling on federal land, maybe. A misdemeanor at best. Those aren't protected wolves, not technically. The greys from Canada, the white from a private collection in Alaska. It'll be your word against mine, and I've got friends in the local department." While they were talking, Noah had knelt beside the injured male wolf. The large predator, which had earlier struggled even to lift its head, now allowed the small boy to examine its splintered leg. Noah's hands moved with surprising gentleness and purpose for a child so young. "He broke it on purpose," Noah said suddenly, looking up at James. His eyes seemed older somehow, filled with a knowledge that no 4-year-old should possess. "After the white one had her babies, he took 3 of them away. He broke the grey one's leg when he tried to stop him." Reynolds went rigid in James's grip. "How could he possibly know that?" he hissed. "No one was there. No one saw." The question echoed James's own thoughts, but he pushed his confusion aside for the moment. "Noah, come away from the wolves now. Help is coming." Noah shook his head stubbornly. "We need to free them first. The chains hurt. Buddy, we can't do that yet. They're wild animals, and one is injured. We need to wait for the ranger and the vet." "They won't hurt us," Noah insisted with absolute certainty. "They promise," Reynolds snorted. "The kid's delusional. Those are apex predators. The second those chains come off, they'll tear all of us apart. They've been in captivity long enough to lose their fear of humans, but not their instinct to kill." "Like, you killed the other wolves?" Noah asked, his eyes fixed accusingly on Reynolds. "The ones whose pelts are in your cabin?" Reynolds' face went slack with shock. "What the hell?" he whispered. "How does he know about my cabin?" James was wondering. The same thing. But before he could question his son further, Noah had moved to the white female's chain. From his pocket, he withdrew the small multi-tool that James had given him for his last birthday, a child's version with limited tools, but apparently functional enough for Noah's small hands to begin working on the lock, securing the wolves. "Chain! Noah, stop!" James ordered, momentarily distracted from Reynolds. It was the opening the poacher had been waiting for. With a sudden, violent twist, he broke free of James's hold and shoved him backward. James stumbled, his prosthetic leg slipping on the muddy ground, throwing him off balance long enough for Reynolds to draw his weapon. "Nobody move!" Reynolds shouted, pointing the gun first at James, then at Noah. "Kid, step away from that wolf!" Noah didn't even look up, continuing to work on the lock with focused determination. "I said move!" Reynolds advanced toward Noah, his gun hand shaking with barely controlled rage. "Those wolves are worth more than your lives. I'm not losing months of work because some brat and his crippled father decided to play heroes." James Doe calculated the distance between them, knowing he couldn't reach Reynolds before the man could fire. The poacher's attention was fixed on Noah, the barrel of his gun tracking toward the small boy crouched beside the white wolf. "Last chance, kid," Reynolds warned. "Move away, or I drop the wolf first, then deal with you." Noah finally looked up, but not at Reynolds. He turned to the injured grey male wolf, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent communication that James couldn't begin to understand. Then, with a click that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence, the lock on the white female's chain fell open. Several things happened simultaneously. Reynolds swung his gun toward the white wolf, finger tightening on the trigger. James launched himself forward, knowing he was too far away but unable to do anything else, and the injured grey male wolf, which had seemed barely able to stand, moments before, somehow snapped its chain and lunged at Reynolds with impossible speed. The gunshot echoed through the forest, its sound immediately swallowed by the snarls of the grey wolf as its powerful jaws clamped around Reynolds's gun arm. The man screamed, the weapon falling from his grasp as he went down beneath the wolf's weight. James scrambled to his feet, racing toward Noah, who had backed away from the white female wolf. The freed wolf hadn't joined the attack on Reynolds, but instead stood protectively in front of Noah and the pup, watching the struggle with alert, intelligent eyes. Noah. James reached his son, pulling him into his arms and checking frantically for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did the bullet—" "I'm okay, Daddy," Noah assured him, seeming remarkably calm despite the violence unfolding nearby. "Shadow protected me. Shadow." "The grey wolf," Noah explained, as if it should be obvious. "Luna is the white one. The baby is Scout." James stared at his son in disbelief. "Noah, how do you know their names? How did you know where to find them? How did you even get here from the cabin?" "They told me," Noah said simply. "In my head. They've been talking to me since we moved here. Luna escaped once and came to our yard when you and Mommy were sleeping. She showed me pictures of where the bad man was keeping them. She needed help." Reynolds' screams had died down to pained whimpers. The grey wolf, Shadow, still pinned him to the ground, but had released his arm, instead keeping him immobilized, with a paw on his chest and teeth bared inches from his throat. The poacher lay completely still, eyes wide with terror, blood spreading from the wounds on his arm. As incredible as it seemed, the wolf appeared to be deliberately restraining. Not killing, its tormentor. The sound of voices and approaching flashlights announced the arrival of help. James recognized Mike Tanner's call before the ranger emerged into the clearing, accompanied by a woman carrying a medical kit who must be Dr. Reyes and two other Forest Service officers. "James," Mike called, taking in the extraordinary scene. Before him, "What in God's name is happening here?" James held Noah close, struggling to make sense of it himself. "This man is Marshal Reynolds, or at least that's what he calls himself. He's a poacher who's been keeping these wolves captive for breeding and sale. He pulled a gun on us when we discovered him." Mike gestured for his colleagues to secure Reynolds, approaching cautiously due to the grey wolf still standing over the poacher. And the wolf just subdued him. "He protected us," Noah said before James could answer. "Shadow won't hurt you unless you try to hurt Luna or Scout." As if understanding the child's words, the grey wolf backed away from Reynolds, allowing the forest officers to move in. The injured animal limped back to where Noah stood with James, its eyes never leaving the boy's face. Dr. Reyes watched this interaction with professional fascination. "I've never seen wolves behave this way with humans, especially not with a child." She addressed Noah directly, keeping her voice gentle. "How did you know their names, sweetheart?" "They told me," Noah repeated. "Luna talks the most. Shadow is quieter, but he shows me pictures. Scout is still learning." The veterinarian exchanged a glance with James, who could only shake his head in bewilderment. "We've been seeing signs of wolves around our property for months. But I never actually spotted any, he explained. Noah's been telling us stories about wolf friends, but we thought it was just imagination. Perhaps not, Dr. Reyes mused, kneeling to examine the grey male's injured leg from a safe distance. There have been documented cases of unusual bonds between wild animals and certain humans, particularly children. Nothing quite like this, though. While they talked, the forest officers had handcuffed Reynolds and were providing basic first aid for his wounds. The poacher glared venomously at James and Noah but remained silent, his earlier bravado replaced by grim resignation. Mike joined them, holstering his weapon now that the situation appeared under control. We found his truck about half a mile from here, hidden under brush. The back was filled with wolf pelts, trapping equipment and paperwork that looks like sales records. This isn't his first operation. The cabin, Noah said insistently, tugging at Mike's sleeve. You need to check his cabin. There are more wolf babies there. Mike looked at James questioningly. Apparently there's a cabin, James confirmed, still trying to reconcile his son's impossible knowledge with reality. Reynolds was breeding the wolves. He took some of the pups. We'll find it, Mike assured them. The important thing now is getting you and Noah home safely and making sure these wolves receive proper care. Dr. Reyes had cautiously moved closer to the injured wolf, which watched her warily, but didn't growl or retreat. The leg is badly broken, she reported. The splint is causing more harm than good. He'll need surgery, possibly rehabilitation at a wildlife center. No, Noah protested immediately. They need to stay together. They're family. Buddy, these are wild animals, James tried to explain gently. They need special care, especially Shadow with his injury. They can come home with us, Noah insisted, his small face set in determination. Luna already knows the way. Reynolds's screams had died down to pained whimpers. Shadow still pinned him to the ground but had released his arm, instead keeping him immobilized with a paw on his chest and teeth bared inches from his throat. The poacher lay completely still, eyes wide with terror, blood spreading from the wounds on his arm. As incredible as it seemed, the wolf appeared to be deliberately restraining, not killing, its tormentor. The sound of voices and approaching flashlights announced the arrival of help. James recognized Mike Tanner's call before the ranger emerged into the clearing, accompanied by a woman carrying a medical kit who must be Dr. Reyes and 2 other Forest Service officers. "James," Mike called, taking in the extraordinary scene before him. What in God's name is happening here? James held Noah close, struggling to make sense of it himself. This man is Marshal Reynolds, or at least that's what he calls himself. He's a poacher who's been keeping these wolves captive for breeding and sale. He pulled a gun on us when we discovered him. Mike gestured for his colleagues to secure Reynolds, approaching cautiously due to the grey wolf still standing over the poacher, and the wolf just subdued him. "He protected us," Noah said before James could answer. "Shadow won't hurt you unless you try to hurt Luna or Scout." As if understanding the child's words, Shadow backed away from Reynolds, allowing the forest officers to move in. The injured animal limped back to where Noah stood with James, its eyes never leaving the boy's face. Dr. Reyes watched this interaction with professional fascination. "I've never seen wolves behave this way with humans, especially not with a child." She addressed Noah directly, keeping her voice gentle. "How did you know their names, sweetheart?" "They told me," Noah repeated. "Luna talks the most. Shadow is quieter, but he shows me pictures. Scout is still learning." The veterinarian exchanged a glance with James, who could only shake his head in bewilderment. We've been seeing signs of wolves around our property for months, but I never actually spotted any," he explained. "Noah's been telling us stories about wolf friends, but we thought it was just imagination." "Perhaps not," Dr. Reyes mused, kneeling to examine Shadow's injured leg from a safe distance. "There have been documented cases of unusual bonds between wild animals and certain humans, particularly children. Nothing quite like this, though. While they talked, the forest officers had handcuffed Reynolds and were providing basic first aid for his wounds." The poacher glared venomously at James and Noah, but remained silent, his earlier bravado replaced by grim resignation. Mike joined them, holstering his weapon now that the situation appeared under control. "We found his truck about half a mile. From here, hidden under brush, the back was filled with wolf pelts, trapping equipment, and paperwork that looks like sales records. This isn't his first operation." "The cabin," Noah said insistently, tugging at Mike's sleeve. "You need to check." "His cabin! There are more wolf babies there." Mike looked at James questioningly. "Apparently there's a cabin," James confirmed, still trying to reconcile his son's impossible knowledge with reality. "Reynolds was breeding the wolves. He took some of the pups." "We'll find it," Mike assured them. "The important thing now is getting you and Noah home safely and making sure these wolves receive proper care." Dr. Reyes had cautiously moved closer to Shadow, which watched her warily but didn't growl or retreat. "The leg is badly broken," she reported. "The splint is causing more harm than good. He'll need surgery, possibly rehabilitation at a wildlife center." "No," Noah protested immediately. "They need to stay together. They're family." "Buddy, these are wild animals," James tried to explain gently. "They need special care, especially Shadow with his injury." "They can come home with us," Noah insisted, his small face set in determination. "Luna already knows the way." Before James could respond, his phone rang. It was Elena, her voice tight with fear when he answered. "James, where are you? Is Noah with you?" "He's gone. I can't find him anywhere." "He's with me," James interrupted, relief washing over him at the sound of her voice. "He's safe. It's a long story, but he somehow found his way to me in the woods." "What? That's impossible. He was asleep when I checked on him 20 minutes ago." Elena's confusion was palpable even through the phone. "I know it sounds crazy. We'll explain everything when we get home." James glanced at the wolves, then at Noah, who was now stroking Luna's head with complete confidence. "We'll have company, though." "Company? James, what's going on?" "I found the wolves Noah's been talking about. Or rather, they found him. It's complicated. We'll be home soon." He ended the call. Before Elena could ask more questions, he didn't have answers to. Dr. Reyes had been conferring with Mike, and now she approached James again. "Your son's connection with these wolves is extraordinary," she said, "and it might actually offer us the best temporary solution. Shadow needs immediate medical attention for that leg, but separating the pack would cause additional stress." "What are you suggesting?" James asked, though he already suspected where this was heading. "We bring them to your property, at least temporarily. I can perform emergency treatment for Shadow there, assess the overall health of all three, and we can figure out next steps once Reynolds' operation is fully exposed." James ran a hand through his rain-soaked hair. "You want me to bring 3 wild wolves to my home, where my wife and son live?" Dr. Reyes smiled slightly. "Your son clearly has some form of connection with them that defies conventional understanding." And from what I've observed, these wolves, especially Luna, are unusually socialized to humans, likely due to Reynolds's breeding program. They're not fully wild, not anymore." "She's right, Daddy," Noah said suddenly at James's side. "They won't hurt us. They just want to be safe." James looked down at his son, then at the wolves. Luna had moved closer to Noah, her posture relaxed despite the presence of strangers. Scout, the wolf dog pup, explored cautiously around them, occasionally returning to Luna's side for reassurance. And Shadow, despite his injury, maintained a vigilant watch over both, his amber eyes intelligent and assessing. "All right," James finally conceded, "but just until we figure this out." The journey back to the cabin was surreal. One of the forest officers accompanied Reynolds to the ranger station for booking and medical attention. Mike and the other officer went to investigate the cabin Noah had mentioned. James carried his exhausted son, while Dr. Reyes helped support Shadow, who limped painfully alongside them. Luna and Scout followed without restraint, the white wolf occasionally ranging ahead before circling back, as if ensuring their path was safe. As they emerged from the tree line, the lights of the Blackwood cabin glowed warmly through the rain. Elena must have seen them approaching, because the front door flew open, and she raced onto the porch, her expression shifting from relief to shock as she registered the full group approaching. "James? Noah?" Her voice caught as her gaze fell on the wolves. "What on earth?" "Mommy!" Noah called, suddenly energized. He wiggled out of James's arms and ran to his mother. "I found them. The wolves I told you about. They needed help, just like I said." Elena gathered her son into her arms, her eyes never leaving the three wolves who had stopped at the edge of the yard, watching the cabin with wary interest. "I think we should all get inside," Dr. Reyes suggested, glancing at the darkening sky where the storm threatened to intensify again. "Shadow needs immediate attention, and I'd prefer not to do it in the rain." Elena looked from the veterinarian to James, clearly struggling to process the bizarre situation. "You want to bring wolves into our home?" "Just temporarily," James assured her, though he understood her disbelief. "I'll explain everything, I promise." Minutes later, they had converted the Blackwood's spacious living room into an impromptu veterinary treatment area. Shadow lay on a blanket, spread before the fireplace, his injured leg extended as Dr. Reyes prepared to remove the crude splint. Luna settled nearby, watching every movement with alert attention. Scout, seemingly more relaxed in the indoor environment, explored the living room under Noah's supervision. "I'm going to need to sedate him for this," Dr. Reyes explained, preparing a syringe. "The break is complex, and removing this splint will be painful. I've only got field equipment with me, so I can stabilize it properly tonight, but he'll need surgery at a proper facility soon." "Will he be okay?" Noah asked anxiously, returning to kneel beside Shadow. Dr. Reyes smiled reassuringly. "He's strong, and wolves have remarkable healing capabilities. With proper care, yes, I believe he'll recover." While the veterinarian worked, James led Elena to the kitchen, where he recounted the evening's extraordinary events in hushed tones. Her expressions ranged from disbelief to horror to amazement as he described finding the wolves exactly where Noah had said they would be, the confrontation with Reynolds, and their son's inexplicable connection with the animals. "He said they've been talking to him, Elena. In his head, he knew things about Reynolds and what he'd done that he couldn't possibly have known." James ran a hand over his face, exhaustion and lingering adrenaline making his thoughts jumbled. "And the wolves, they protected him. Shadow attacked Reynolds when he pointed a gun at Noah, but he didn't kill him. He just restrained him. Elena glanced through the doorway to where Noah sat beside Luna, his small hand buried in her thick white fur. The wolf's eyes were half-closed. Her posture relaxed, looking more like an oversized dog than a wild predator. "I always knew Noah was special," she whispered. "The way he understands animals, how he seems to know things." She turned back to James. "Do you remember last summer when he insisted we check on the Martin's horse? How he knew it had colic before anyone else noticed symptoms?" James nodded slowly. "And the fox in the hollow log? And your father's stroke?" He met his wife's gaze. "What does it mean, Elena? What's happening with our son?" Before she could answer, Dr. Reyes called from the living room. "I could use some assistance, please." They returned to find Shadow fully sedated, his massive form completely still, except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. Dr. Reyes had removed the makeshift splint, revealing the extent of the damage beneath. A compound fracture that had been improperly set and was now showing signs of infection. "This is worse than I thought," she said grimly. "The bone needs to be reset properly, and I need to clean the infection before I can stabilize it. I'll need more hands." James stepped forward immediately. "Tell me what to do." For the next hour, they worked under Dr. Reyes's careful instruction. James held Shadow's legs steady while the veterinarian cleaned, realigned, and properly splinted the broken bone. Elena prepared antiseptic solutions and bandages as needed. Noah remained by Luna's side, periodically whispering reassurances that seemed meant for both the white wolf and the sedated Shadow. When they finally finished, Dr. Reyes sat back on her heels with a weary sigh. "That should hold him until I can arrange proper surgery. The antibiotics I've given him will fight the infection, but he'll need careful monitoring." "We'll watch over him," Noah promised solemnly. "Luna says thank you." The veterinarian smiled at the boy. "You're welcome, Luna." She turned to James and Elena. "I need to return to the clinic for additional supplies and to make arrangements for tomorrow. Will you be all right with them until I get back?" James glanced at his wife, who nodded after only a moment's hesitation. "We'll be fine," he assured Dr. Reyes. "Noah seems to have everything under control." After the veterinarian departed, promising to return first thing in the morning, an unusual silence settled over the cabin. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a gentle patter of raindrops from the trees outside. Shadow slept peacefully by the fire, his breathing deep and regular under the influence of the sedation. Luna had settled on the rug beside him, her white fur stark against the dark wood of the floor. Scout had finally exhausted himself exploring and now curled in a tight ball against Luna's side. "They need water," Noah announced, breaking the silence. "And Luna is hungry. She hasn't eaten for 2 days. I'll get some water," Elena offered, seeming to accept her son's knowledge without question now. "What do wolves eat?" "We have some ground beef in the freezer," Noah nodded. "That's good, and some chicken if we have it." As Elena went to prepare food for their unexpected guests, James sat down beside Noah on the floor. "Buddy, I need you to explain something to me. How long have you been able to talk with the wolves?" Noah considered the question with surprising thoughtfulness for a child his age. "Luna came first. She found me when we were moving in. I was playing by the big oak tree, and she watched me from the woods. She was scared but curious. She showed me pictures in my head of the bad man and where he kept them." "Showed you pictures? Like memories?" Noah nodded. "And feelings. She was so sad and afraid. The bad man had taken her babies, all except Scout. Shadow was trying to protect them, but the bad man hurt him. James struggled to comprehend what his son was describing. And you can understand other animals too, not just wolves. All animals talk, Noah explained matter-of-factly. Most people just don't listen right. Some animals use pictures, some use feelings. The wolves are easiest because they think most like people. Elena returned with several bowls, water for all three wolves and a mixture of ground meat for Luna and Scout. She placed them near the animals, but kept a respectful distance. "It's okay," Noah assured his mother. "Luna won't hurt you. She knows you're my family." As if confirming his words, Luna raised her head and looked directly at Elena. There was an intelligence in those pale blue eyes that sent a shiver down James's spine. Not fear, exactly, but a profound sense that he was in the presence of something far more complex than a simple wild animal. Luna rose gracefully and approached the food, eating with delicate precision despite her obvious hunger. Scout joined her immediately, gulping his portion with puppyish enthusiasm. Shadow remained asleep, oblivious to the domestic scene unfolding around him. "This is the strangest night of my life," Elena murmured, settling on the couch beside James. "And that's saying something, being married to you." James smiled wearily, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and discover this was all some bizarre dream." "Not a dream," Noah said, climbing onto the couch between them. "Luna says we need to find her other babies. The bad man sold them to people who don't understand wolves." James exchanged a glance with Elena over their son's head. "Buddy, I think we need to let Ranger Mike and the authorities handle that part. They're investigating Reynolds's cabin now." "But Luna is worried about them," Noah insisted. "They're too young to be away from her. They need her milk and her warmth." Elena stroked Noah's hair gently. "Sweetheart, the Rangers will do everything they can to find them. Right now, we need to focus on helping Shadow get better and keeping Luna and Scout safe." Noah looked unconvinced, but didn't argue further. He yawned, suddenly the excitement and late hour finally catching up with him. "Time for bed," Elena decided, rising from the couch. "You've had quite an adventure tonight." "But I need to stay with them," Noah protested sleepily. "Shadow might be scared when he wakes up in a strange place." "You need rest," James said firmly. "We'll leave the bedroom door open, and if Shadow needs you when he wakes up, we'll come get you right away." This compromise seemed to satisfy Noah. He slid off the couch and approached Luna, who watched him with attentive eyes. "Good night," he whispered, wrapping his arms around her neck in a gentle hug. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you anymore." The white wolf lowered her head slightly, allowing the embrace. The sight of his small son hugging a creature that could easily kill him with a single bite should have terrified James, but somehow it didn't. There was a rightness to the scene that defied rational explanation. After saying goodnight to Scout and placing a gentle hand on Shadow's sleeping form, Noah allowed his parents to lead him upstairs to bed. He was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow, exhaustion claiming him completely. James and Elena stood watching him for a long moment, the reality of the night's events settling over them like a strange dream. "What are we going to do?" Elena whispered as they closed Noah's door partway. "We can't keep wild wolves as pets, James." "I know," he agreed, leading her back downstairs, "but I don't think that's what's happening here. Noah doesn't see them as pets. He sees them as, I don't know, people, almost. Individuals with their own thoughts and feelings. They paused at the bottom of the stairs, observing the wolves in their living room. Luna had returned to her position beside Shadow, but her eyes were alert, watching the staircase where they stood. Scout had curled up again, his small form rising and falling with each breath. "And what about Noah?" Elena continued, keeping her voice low. "This connection he has with them, it's not normal, James. Children have vivid imaginations, but this goes beyond that. He knew exactly where to find them. He knew things about Reynolds that he couldn't possibly have known." James sighed heavily, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on him. "I don't know. Maybe Dr. Reyes is right. There are documented cases of unusual bonds between humans and animals. Maybe Noah has some kind of gift." "A gift," Elena repeated softly. She watched Luna, who had finally laid her head down, though her eyes remained fixed on them. "Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe he just listens in a way the rest of us have forgotten how to do." Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of James's phone. It was Mike Tanner, his voice tight with a mixture of disgust and triumph. "Found the cabin," the ranger reported without preamble. "It's worse than we thought, James. Reynolds has been running a full-scale breeding operation. We found records going back 5 years, sales of wolf and wolf hybrid pups to private collectors across 3 continents. "And the pups Noah mentioned?" James asked, meeting Elena's concerned gaze. 3 of them, just like he said, all white with blue eyes, about 8 weeks old. They're malnourished but alive. We're bringing them to the wildlife center tonight." Mike paused, and James could hear the confusion in his voice when he continued. "How did your boy know about them, James? Reynolds's cabin is 10 miles from your property, hidden deep in the forest. There's no way he could have stumbled across it accidentally." James looked toward the living room, where Luna had raised her head again, as if listening to the conversation. "It's complicated, Mike. I'll explain when you come by tomorrow. Now just know that Noah has some kind of connection with these wolves, especially Luna, the white female. She's the mother of those pups. This is the strangest case I've worked in 20 years with the Forest Service," Mike admitted. "But whatever's going on with your son, I'm grateful. Without him, we might never have uncovered Reynolds's operation. Those wolves would have died, and he would have kept right on trafficking endangered species." After ending the call, James relayed the information to Elena. "They found the pups," he concluded. "They're taking them to the wildlife center tonight. Luna needs to be with them." Noah's voice came from the stairs, startling both adults. He stood in his pajamas, his hair tousled from brief sleep. "She's really worried. She can feel them calling for her." "Noah, honey, you should be asleep," Elena said, moving toward him. "I tried, but Luna was calling me," Noah explained, descending the stairs and moving directly to the white wolf, who had risen to her feet at his approach. "The baby wolves need their mother." James knelt to his son's level. "Buddy, the pups are getting good care at the wildlife center. They're being fed and kept warm. Luna needs to stay here and take care of Shadow and Scout until Dr. Reyes comes back tomorrow." Noah shook his head stubbornly. "No, Daddy, you don't understand. She needs to be with all her babies. She's their mother." The simple truth of the statement hit James with unexpected force. He glanced at Luna, who stood watching them with those intelligent eyes, and suddenly saw not a wild predator or an exotic animal, but a mother, separated from her children, a feeling any parent could understand. "James," Elena said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe Noah's right." James looked between his wife, his son, and the white wolf, who somehow seemed to understand every word they were saying. A decision formed in his mind, one that might seem crazy to anyone else, but in this night of impossibilities, felt strangely right. "All right," he said finally. "I'll call Mike back. We'll bring Luna to her pups." Mike Tanner's voice carried a mixture of confusion and concern over the phone. "You want to bring the white wolf to the wildlife center tonight, James? I'm not sure that's a good idea." "I understand your hesitation," James replied, watching as Luna paced anxiously near the front door. The white wolf's intelligence was unmistakable. She clearly understood they were discussing her separated pups. But according to Noah, those pups need their mother. They're too young to be without her. There was a long pause on the line. "This is highly irregular. Protocol dictates—" "Mike," James interrupted, "I think we're well beyond protocol at this point. You've seen how these wolves respond to Noah. You witnessed Shadow protect my son from Reynolds. Something extraordinary is happening here, and if Noah says Luna needs to be with her pups, I believe him." Elena knelt beside Noah, who was stroking Luna's head with gentle, reassuring motions. Scout had curled up next to Shadow's sleeping form, seemingly content to remain behind. "The center closes to visitors at 9, Mike finally said. "It's nearly midnight now." "You're already there with the pups, aren't you?" James guessed. Another pause. "Yes, we have a veterinarian examining them now." "Then let us bring Luna. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work out, and we bring her back here. Best case, those pups get their mother back." A weary sigh came through the phone. "All right, I'll call ahead and make arrangements. But James, you need to understand, if Luna shows any signs of aggression or stress that might harm the pups or staff, we'll have to separate them immediately. Understood. We'll be there in 30 minutes. James ended the call and turned to Elena and Noah. "We're going to take Luna to see her babies." Noah's face lit up with joy. "Thank you, Daddy. Luna's so happy. She says Shadow and Scout will be okay here while we're gone." Elena stood. Decision made. "I'll stay with them. Shadow shouldn't be left alone after surgery, and Scout seems comfortable here." Preparations moved quickly after that. James helped Noah into his coat and boots, while Elena gathered some of the raw meat she'd prepared earlier, wrapping it carefully to bring along for Luna. "Be careful," Elena said, embracing James tightly before he left. "This all feels so surreal." "I know," he agreed, kissing her softly. "But Noah seems so certain. I have to trust that." Outside, the night had cleared after the storm. Stars now punctuated the black sky, and a nearly full moon illuminated the forest edge with silvery light. Luna stood beside Noah, her white fur almost glowing in the moonlight, creating an ethereal picture that James knew would stay with him forever. His small son, standing confidently beside a creature of wild beauty and power. The drive to the wildlife center was tense, but peaceful. Luna sat in the back seat beside Noah, her behavior remarkably composed for a wild animal in a vehicle. She occasionally pressed her nose to the window as if tracking their progress, but mostly remained still, her blue eyes reflective in the dashboard lights. "How you feeling, buddy?" James asked, glancing at his son in the rearview mirror. "Happy," Noah replied simply, his hand resting on Luna's back. "Luna's nervous but excited. She can feel her babies getting closer." "Noah," James began carefully, "how long have you been able to understand animals this way? Was it always like this, or did it start happening recently?" Noah considered the question with the seriousness of a much older child. "I think always, but it got stronger when we moved to the woods. There are more animals here, and they talk more. In the city, animals are usually scared or confused. Here they know who they are. James pondered his son's words as they drove through the darkened countryside. Noah had always shown an unusual affinity for animals, but James and Elena had attributed it to a child's natural curiosity and compassion. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of something far beyond normal understanding, James found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about his son, about animals, about the boundaries between human and wild consciousness. The Whisperwoods Wildlife Rehabilitation Center appeared ahead, its modern log and glass building dark, except for lights at the rear entrance where Mike Tanner waited. The ranger's expression was a mixture of professional concern and personal curiosity as James parked the SUV. "This is highly unconventional," Mike said by way of greeting, his eyes fixed on Luna as she emerged from the vehicle beside Noah. "Dr. Coleman is waiting inside with the pups. She's skeptical about this whole situation, just to warn you." James nodded. "I understand. We appreciate you making this possible, Mike." "The wolf should be leashed," Mike said hesitantly, extending a sturdy lead. "Center protocol." Noah shook his head firmly. "Luna won't run away. She just wants to see her babies." Mike glanced at James, who shrugged helplessly. "I think we're past standard protocols tonight, Mike." With obvious reluctance, the ranger pocketed the lead and led them toward the building. "The pups are in the neonatal care unit. Dr. Coleman has been tube-feeding them a special formula, but they're weak. She's not optimistic about their chances without intensive care." Noah reached up to take James's hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. "They need their mum, not tubes. Luna can fix them." Inside, the center smelled of antiseptic and fur. Mike led them down a hallway lined with treatment rooms and recovery enclosures to a specially equipped nursery area. Through the glass door, James could see a woman in a white lab coat bent over an incubator-like structure, her back to them. Luna's reaction was immediate and intense. Her body tensed, nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of her pups. A soft whine escaped her throat, the first vocalization James had heard from her that wasn't a threat display. Mike knocked gently on the glass. The woman turned, revealing a stern face framed by graying dark hair. Her expression shifted from professional neutrality to alarm when she spotted Luna. "That's Dr. Coleman," Mike explained quietly as she approached. "The door. One of the best wildlife veterinarians in the state. She specializes in predator rehabilitation." The door opened, and Dr. Coleman stepped half out, deliberately blocking the entrance. "Ranger Tanner, you didn't mention the mother wolf would be unrestrained." Her voice was cold with disapproval. "She won't hurt anyone," Noah said before Mike could respond. "She just wants her babies." Dr. Coleman's gaze shifted to Noah, her expression softening slightly at the sight of the small boy. "You must be Noah. Ranger Tanner told me about you." She crouched to his level, her voice gentler but still firm. "I understand you care about these wolves, but the pups are very sick. They need specialized medical care that only we can provide." "They need their mother," Noah insisted. "Luna's milk has special medicine in it for them." The veterinarian blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Well, yes, maternal antibodies are important, but—" "Please," Noah interrupted. "Just let Luna see them. If she can't help them, we'll bring her back home, I promise." Something in Noah's earnest expression seemed to reach Dr. Coleman. She studied him for a long moment, then straightened and addressed James. "Your son is very persuasive, Mr. Blackwood. Against my better judgment, I'm going to allow this, but at the first sign of distress from either the mother or the pups, we intervene." James nodded. "That's fair, thank you." Dr. Coleman stepped aside, allowing them to enter the neonatal unit. The room was warm and softly lit, with several incubation units along one wall. Luna entered cautiously, her nose working constantly as she tracked the scent of her offspring. Noah stayed close beside her, one hand resting lightly on her back. "They're here," Dr. Coleman said, leading them to a clear-sided incubator, where 3 tiny white bundles lay huddled together on a heated pad. Each pup was attached to monitoring equipment and had a feeding tube carefully secured. "They're suffering from malnutrition, dehydration, and possible exposure. They haven't been responsive to treatment so far." Luna approached the incubator, her movements deliberately slow and controlled. She stretched her neck to sniff at the clear barrier separating her from her pups, then looked at Noah with what James could only interpret as a plea. "She needs to be with them," Noah translated unnecessarily. "The plastic is scaring them. They can smell her but can't reach her." Dr. Coleman hesitated, her professional training clearly at war with the extraordinary situation before her. Those incubators maintain precise temperature and humidity levels. The pups are extremely vulnerable right now. "Please," Noah said. Again, his voice soft but determined. "Luna won't hurt the machines. She just needs to touch them to let them know she's here." After another moment of internal struggle, Dr. Coleman carefully opened the top of the incubator. "I can allow brief contact, but we'll need to monitor their vital signs closely." The moment the barrier was removed, Luna's demeanor changed subtly. She became somehow both more alert and more gentle, her movements precise as she stretched her head over the edge of the incubator. With exquisite care, she began to nuzzle each tiny pup, her tongue delicately grooming their small bodies between the monitoring wires. The effect was almost immediate. The smallest pup, which had been lying motionless, began to squirm and make tiny squeaking sounds. The other 2 responded similarly, their minuscule paws pushing against their mother's muzzle as she attended to them. "Their heart rates are stabilizing," Dr. Coleman observed, watching the monitors with professional detachment that couldn't quite mask her amazement. "Body temperatures rising slightly. They're becoming more responsive." Noah smiled up at James. "I told you, Luna knows what they need." Dr. Coleman made a quick decision. "We need to remove the feeding tubes and monitoring equipment if she's going to properly care for them. It will mean we have less medical control, but—" She gestured at the clearly improving pups. "Whatever she's doing seems more effective." Then dawn broke over the mountains as Dr. Coleman's truck wound along a nearly invisible forest road. James had tried to keep track of their route, but after several hours of driving on unmarked dirt paths that seemed to vanish into the underbrush, he'd given up. The veterinarian clearly knew these woods intimately, navigating with confidence. Even as the road deteriorated into little more than a game trail, Noah had fallen asleep against James's shoulder, his small body finally succumbing to exhaustion after the night's extraordinary events. In the rear compartment, Luna remained alert, her blue eyes visible in the rearview mirror whenever James checked on her. The 3 pups nestled against her belly, nursing occasionally, but mostly sleeping, their tiny bodies finally relaxed after their reunion with their mother. "Almost there," Dr. Coleman announced, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over them for the past hour. She gestured toward a ridge ahead where the first rays of sunlight illuminated a small structure nearly hidden among the pines. "My research cabin. Not much to look at, but it's secure and off the grid." James peered through the windshield at their destination. The cabin was indeed modest. A simple A-frame construction with a metal roof and weathered wooden siding. Solar panels glinted on the south-facing slope, and a small satellite dish was mounted near the chimney. What struck him most was the setting. Perched on a natural shelf carved into the mountainside, the cabin overlooked a stunning valley while remaining nearly invisible from below. "It's perfect," he said, understanding immediately why she'd chosen this location. Strategic positioning, natural cover, single approach route that can be monitored. Dr. Coleman glanced at him with newfound appreciation. "Your military background is showing, Mr. Blackwood." "Yes, that's exactly why I selected this site for my research station. I study predator behavior in natural settings, wolves, mountain lions, bears. The work sometimes attracts unwanted attention from poachers and illegal trophy hunters." "Like Reynolds," James observed. "And apparently his associates," she agreed grimly, referring to the fake federal agent they'd narrowly escaped. "I've had run-ins with his type before. They see wildlife as commodities, not as essential parts of a complex ecosystem." The truck lurched as they navigated the final stretch of rough terrain. Noah stirred, but didn't wake, mumbling something unintelligible before settling deeper against James's side. Luna, however, was fully alert now, her body tense as she surveyed the unfamiliar territory through the windows. "Will she be comfortable here?" James asked, nodding toward the white wolf. "The cabin sits on 20 acres of private wilderness preserve," Dr. Coleman explained, bringing the vehicle to a stop near the structure. "There's a reinforced enclosure behind the main building, originally designed for observing injured predators during rehabilitation. It's spacious, secure, and has access to a natural spring. Not ideal long-term, but safer than your home, with Reynolds's people looking for them." James nodded, appreciating her practical approach. "I need to call Elena, let her know we're safe, and check on Shadow and Scout." "There's a satellite phone inside. Cell service is non-existent up here. Deliberately so." Dr. Coleman cut the engine and turned to face him fully. "Mr. Blackwood, before we go in, I need to be direct about something." "James, please," he corrected, sensing her serious tone. "And I prefer directness." "James, then, what we're doing, harboring wolves, that are evidence in a federal investigation, interfering with wildlife management protocols. It's technically illegal. I could lose my license. You could face charges. Are you certain this is a path you want to continue down?" James considered her words carefully, looking down at his sleeping son, then at Luna watching them attentively from the back of the truck. "My son has a gift I don't understand. These wolves protected him when a man pointed a gun at his head, and that federal agent back there wasn't interested in proper wildlife management. He had other motives. Until I understand what's happening and know these animals are truly safe, yes, this is exactly the path I'm on." Dr. Coleman studied him for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Good answer. Now let's get everyone inside before satellite imagery picks up a vehicle where none should be." She exited the truck, moving quickly to open the rear hatch. "I'll help Luna and her pups. You bring Noah." James carefully gathered his sleeping son into his arms, marveling at how peaceful he looked despite the chaos of the past 12 hours. Noah had faced danger, communicated with wild predators, and exposed a criminal operation, all with the straightforward conviction of a child who saw clearly what the adults around him could not. The cabin's interior surprised James with its sophistication. What appeared rustic from outside revealed itself to be a well-equipped research station with modern appliances powered by the solar array, sophisticated communications equipment, and one wall dedicated entirely to wildlife monitoring systems. "Impressive," James commented as Dr. Coleman directed him to a small bedroom where he could lay Noah down. "The benefits of grant funding," she replied with a small smile. "Plus 20 years of investing my own resources into what matters most. To me," she gestured toward a door at the rear of the main room. "The secure enclosure is through there. I'll prepare it for Luna and the pups." While Dr. Coleman worked, James tucked Noah into the narrow bed, removing only his shoes before pulling a blanket over him. The boy didn't stir, his body desperately catching up on needed rest. For a moment, James simply watched his son sleep, overwhelmed by both fierce protectiveness and wonder at the extraordinary bond Noah had formed with the wolves. The satellite phone sat on a desk in the main room. James dialed his home number, rehearsing what to tell Elena without causing her undue worry. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with concern. "James, is that you?" "It's me," he confirmed, relief washing through him at the sound of her voice. "We're safe. Noah's sleeping. Luna is with her pups. We're at a secure location with Dr. Coleman." "Thank God." The tension in Elena's voice eased slightly. "Shadow is doing better. His fever broke about an hour ago. Scout has been restless, pacing by the door, but otherwise seems fine." She paused. "James, someone came to the house." His grip tightened on the phone. "When? Who?" "About 2 hours after you left. A man claiming to be from Fish and Wildlife, asking about the wolves. Said they needed to be transferred to a proper facility immediately." "Did he give a name?" James asked, already suspecting the answer. "Agent Rivera. He had identification, but something felt wrong. I didn't let him in. Told him you'd taken all the wolves to the wildlife center for emergency treatment. He seemed angry. Called someone from his car before driving away." James exchanged a look with Dr. Coleman, who had returned and was clearly listening to his side of the conversation. "You did the right thing, Elena. I don't think he was a real agent. The same man showed up at the wildlife center. Noah says..." He hesitated, still adjusting to the reality of his son's unusual abilities. "Noah says he works with Reynolds, that he's involved in the animal trafficking." "I believe it," Elena replied firmly. "The way he looked at me at our home, it wasn't professional concern, it was calculation." Her voice lowered. "James, what's happening? Why are these people so determined to get these wolves?" "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "But from what Reynolds said, Luna is extremely valuable. A pure Arctic wolf, with rare genetics. The pups even more so. There's big money involved, and apparently powerful people who don't like losing their investments. What do we do now?" James considered their options. "Stay put for now. Keep the doors locked. I'll call Mike Tanner, have him send someone to watch the house. And Elena, if anything feels wrong, anything at all, take Shadow and Scout and go. Oh, to your sister's place in Colorado. Don't tell anyone where you're headed." "This is crazy," Elena whispered, though her tone was more resigned than resistant. 2 days ago, our biggest concern was whether Noah was adjusting well to life in the countryside. Despite everything, James smiled. "And now we're harboring wolves and evading wildlife traffickers. Life takes unexpected turns. Be careful," Elena said softly. "Both of you. I love you." "We love you too. I'll call again tonight." After ending the call, James turned to Dr. Coleman, who was preparing food in the small kitchen area. "We need to contact Mike Tanner. Elena says the fake agent showed up at our house looking for the wolves." Dr. Coleman nodded, wiping her hands on a towel. "I already tried while you were settling Noah. No answer at the station or his mobile. Could be poor reception in the valley, or—" She didn't finish the thought. "Or something happened after we left," James concluded grimly. "We need more information." "Agreed. I have contacts in the legitimate Federal Wildlife Service who can verify what's happening with the Reynolds case." She gestured to a computer workstation in the corner. "Give me a few minutes." While Dr. Coleman made her calls, James checked on Luna and her pups in the secure enclosure. The space was impressive. A large indoor area connected to an even larger outdoor run surrounded by reinforced fencing. The white wolf had settled. In a corner padded with blankets, her 3 pups nursing contentedly. She watched James enter, but showed no signs of stress or aggression, merely observing him with that unsettling intelligence he was beginning to recognize. "You're safe here," he told her, feeling only slightly foolish for speaking directly to a wolf. After everything he'd witnessed, it seemed reasonable to assume she understood far more than an ordinary animal would. "I'll protect your family until we figure this out." Luna's blue eyes held his for a long moment before she lowered her head to nuzzle one of her pups. James took it as acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. When he returned to the main cabin, Dr. Coleman was just finishing her calls, her expression troubled as she replaced the satellite phone. "Bad news?" James guessed. "Concerning, at least," she confirmed, gesturing for him to sit. "My contact at the Federal Wildlife Service confirms they've opened an investigation into Reynolds's operation, but they haven't assigned field agents. Yet, certainly no one named Rivera, so he was definitely an imposter." "Yes, but that's not the most troubling part." Dr. Coleman leaned forward, lowering her voice, though there was no one else to hear them. "According to my contact, Reynolds made his one permitted phone call to a law firm that exclusively represents Northland Enterprises." James frowned. "Should that name mean something to me?" "It's a multinational corporation owned by Harrison Northland, billionaire, big game hunter, and major investor in private wildlife collections. They own safari parks, exotic animal exhibitions, and conservation breeding programs across 3 continents." Her expression darkened. "They're also suspected of being the largest illegal wildlife traffickers in the Northern Hemisphere, though nothing has ever been proven." "And Reynolds works for them?" "More likely he contracts to them, keeping enough distance that they have deniability if someone like him gets caught." Dr. Coleman ran a hand through her grey-streaked hair. "If Northland is involved, this just got much more complicated. They have resources, political connections, and a reputation for eliminating problems efficiently." James processed this information, his military training automatically assessing threat levels and potential responses. These wolves must be exceptionally valuable for a company that size to send people after them so quickly. Arctic wolves with pure genetics are increasingly rare due to climate change and habitat loss, Dr. Coleman explained. A breeding female like Luna, plus pups that could establish a new bloodline. They could be worth millions to the right collectors. A small voice from the doorway interrupted their conversation. "Luna isn't worth millions. She's worth everything." They turned to find Noah standing there, hair rumpled from sleep, eyes serious beyond his years. James opened his arms, and Noah crossed the room to climb into his lap, small body still warm from the blankets. "Hey, buddy," James said softly. "How long have you been listening?" Not long, Noah answered, leaning against his father's chest. Luna woke me up. She was worried about Shadow and Scout back home with Mommy. James exchanged a glance with Dr. Coleman over Noah's head. I just spoke with Mom. Shadow and Scout are doing fine. Mom's taking good care of them. Noah nodded, seeming unsurprised. Luna knows she can feel them even from far away. They're her family too. Dr. Coleman approached, crouching to Noah's eye level. Noah, I'm curious about something. When did Luna first start communicating with you? Was it when you moved to the cabin? The boy considered this seriously. No, she found me before that, when we first came to look at the house. Remember, Daddy, when you and Mommy were talking to the house lady, I went to look at the big trees. James did remember. Noah had wandered to the edge of the property while they discussed purchase details with the real estate agent. They'd found him sitting peacefully by the tree line, claiming he'd been talking to the forest friends. Luna was watching from the trees, Noah continued. She was scared but curious. I felt her before I saw her, like when you know someone's looking at you. Except it was in my head. And she communicated with you? Dr. Coleman asked, her professional interest clear. Not with words, Noah explained patiently. With pictures and feelings. She showed me the bad man's camp and how he took her from her old home far away where everything is snow. She was so sad and scared. His small face hardened with a determination that looked out of place on a 4-year-old. I promised I'd help her, and I did. Dr. Coleman sat back on her heels, her scientific skepticism visibly warring with the evidence before her. Noah, what you're describing sounds like a form of telepathy, the ability to communicate mind to mind without words. Most scientists don't believe that's possible. Noah shrugged, unconcerned with scientific consensus. Maybe they're not listening right. Animals talk all the time. Humans just forgot how to hear them. From the simplicity of his statement, James felt a chill of recognition. Elena had suggested something similar, that Noah simply listened in ways others had forgotten. What if that was literally true? What if humans had once possessed this ability but had lost it over centuries of separation from the natural world? Can you communicate with all animals this way? Dr. Coleman asked, her tone gentle but intense. Different animals talk different ways, Noah replied. Birds use colors in your head. Fish use feelings that move like water. Deer use smells and pictures of places. Wolves are easiest because they think most like people. They have families and territories and remember things in stories. Dr. Coleman looked at James, her expression a mixture of amazement and scientific curiosity. This is extraordinary. If Noah can genuinely communicate with animals, particularly predator species like wolves, it could change our understanding of animal cognition, James finished, following her train of thought, and of human-wildlife interaction. Exactly, she agreed, excitement coloring her voice. My entire career has been dedicated to better understanding predator behavior and advocating for coexistence rather than conflict. A child with Noah's apparent abilities could revolutionize the field. James felt a protective instinct surge within him. Noah isn't a research subject, Dr. Coleman. Her expression softened immediately. Of course not. I apologize if that's how it sounded. I'm just overwhelmed by the possibilities. She turned back to Noah. What else has Luna told you? Anything that might help us understand why these people want her and her pups so badly? Noah's forehead wrinkled in concentration. The bad man Reynolds. He told other bad men that Luna is special. She comes from a place very far north, where wolves are bigger and stronger than regular wolves. The other bad men want her babies because they'll grow up to be big and strong too, and people will pay to own them. Arctic wolves from the high northern latitudes, Dr. Coleman nodded. They're larger, with thicker coats and different physical adaptations than timber wolves. But there's more to it than that, isn't there? Noah nodded solemnly. Luna says she's the last one from her family. The bad men took all the others away, or... He hesitated, looking to James as if unsure whether to continue. It's okay, buddy, James encouraged gently. You can tell us. Or killed them for their fur, Noah finished quietly. Luna escaped when they were moving her to a new place. She ran and ran until she found our forest. Dr. Coleman's expression had turned grim. If Luna is from a particularly rare bloodline, possibly one of the last of her genetic line, that would explain the resources being deployed to recover her. She and her pups represent an irreplaceable genetic resource, both for legitimate conservation and for the illegal exotic animal trade. They're not resources, Noah stated firmly. They're people, wolf people. James hugged his son closer. The satellite phone rang, shattering the peaceful morning silence that had settled over the cabin. Dr. Coleman answered quickly, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she listened to the caller. James watched her closely, noting the way her shoulders tensed and her knuckles whitened around the receiver. Noah had gone to check on Luna and the pups, giving the adults a moment to speak freely. When? Dr. Coleman asked, her voice tightly. Controlled. And Mike? She listened intently, nodding once. Understood. Yes, they're safe. I'll tell him. She ended the call, placing the phone down with deliberate care. Bad news? James asked, already knowing the answer from her body language. That was Dr. Reyes, the wildlife veterinarian who treated Shadow. Dr. Coleman met his gaze steadily. The wildlife center was raided early this morning by men claiming to be federal agents. They were looking for Luna and her pups. James felt ice form in his stomach. And Mike Tanner, in the hospital. He tried to verify their credentials, and they... She hesitated, glancing toward the door where Noah had gone. They used excessive force. He has a concussion and some broken ribs, but he'll recover. These people aren't just traffickers, James said grimly. They're willing to assault a federal officer. That escalates things considerably. Dr. Coleman nodded. Dr. Reyes only escaped, questioning because she was making a house call when it happened. She went straight to the hospital when she heard about Mike, then called me from a secure line. She paused. There's more. They went to your cabin afterward. Elena and the wolves are gone. Gone. James was on his feet instantly, heart racing. And what do you mean, gone? Dr. Reyes doesn't know details. The local sheriff told her that when the men arrived at your property, they found the door open and no one inside. No signs of struggle, but no note either. James reached for the satellite. Phone. I need to call my sister-in-law in Colorado. If Elena followed my instructions, that's where she'd go. Wait. Dr. Coleman placed a hand on his arm. Think this through. If these people are sophisticated enough to impersonate federal agents and raid a wildlife center, they may be monitoring known family connections. Calling your sister-in-law might lead them straight to Elena. James recognized the logic, but hated it. The need to know his wife was safe warred with the tactical assessment that contacting her might endanger her further. Then what do you suggest? Before Dr. Coleman could answer, Noah returned to the main room. his expression unusually serious for a child his age. "Luna says Shadow and Scout are with Mommy. They're hiding in a safe place." Both adults turned to him. "How does Luna know that, buddy?" James asked gently. "She can feel them," Noah explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She has a connection with Shadow and Scout, not words but feelings. They're scared, but not hurt." James knelt to his son's level. "Did Luna tell you where they're hiding?" Noah shook his head. "Not exactly. She sees through Shadow's eyes sometimes, but she doesn't know human places like we do. She showed me trees and water and a small den." He frowned in concentration. "It smells like fish and old wood." "That could be anywhere in this region," Dr. Coleman sighed. "There are hundreds of fishing cabins scattered throughout these mountains." James processed this information, military training kicking in as he assessed their situation. Elena was smart and resourceful. If she'd felt threatened, she would have taken the wolves somewhere secluded but familiar. "The Martin property," he said suddenly. "Old Man Martin's fishing cabin on Blackwater Lake. Elena and I helped him repair it last month after the spring flooding. It's isolated, accessible only by a private road or boat, and stocked with emergency supplies." Dr. Coleman considered this. "Could she have reached it with an injured wolf?" "It's only about 5 miles from our home through the forest. There's a trail Elena and I have hiked several times." James felt a surge of certainty. That's where she'd go. Martin rarely uses it this time of year, and he gave us a key in case of emergency. "We should go there," Noah insisted, tugging at James's. "Andy, Luna wants her whole family together." Dr. Coleman shook her head firmly. "That's exactly what we can't do. If these people raided a federal wildlife facility, they won't hesitate to search every cabin in the area. Our movement could lead them straight to Elena." "Then what's our alternative?" James asked, frustration evident in his voice. "Sit here and wait while armed men hunt my wife?" "No," Dr. Coleman replied calmly. "We gather intelligence, verify Elena's location without exposing her, and contact legitimate authorities who can help." She moved to a locked cabinet on the far wall, opening it to reveal communications equipment more sophisticated than James had expected. "I have resources that can help us, starting with satellite imagery of the lake area." For the next hour, they worked systematically. Dr. Coleman accessed recent satellite photos of Blackwater Lake, while James drew detailed maps of the surrounding terrain from memory, marking potential approach routes and vantage points. Noah sat quietly at the table, occasionally relaying information from Luna about Shadow and Scout's condition. "There," Dr. Coleman said finally, pointing to a small structure partially visible through the tree canopy in the enhanced satellite image. "That's the Martin cabin." James leaned closer, studying the image carefully. "Yes, and look, there's smoke coming from the chimney, faint but visible. Someone's there." "Could be anyone," Dr. Coleman cautioned. "A caretaker, Martin himself. Hunters using it without permission." "No," Noah interjected confidently. "It's Mommy. Luna says Shadow can smell her fear, but she's being brave for them." James and Dr. Coleman exchanged looks, both still adjusting to the matter-of-fact way Noah relayed information from the wolves. "All right," James decided. "We need to confirm it's Elena without alerting anyone watching the area. Then we need a plan to extract her and the wolves safely." Dr. Coleman nodded. "I have a colleague who patrols this wilderness area, Aaron Redhawk. He's a biologist and former tribal game warden. If anyone can approach the cabin undetected and verify occupancy, it's him." "Can we trust him?" James asked bluntly. "With my life," she replied without hesitation. And he has no love for poachers or wildlife traffickers. His people consider wolves sacred. Make the call, James agreed. But we'll need more than verification. We need a plan to bring Elena and the wolves here, or to move all of us to a more secure location. While Dr. Coleman contacted her colleague, James returned to studying the satellite images and maps. Military strategies played through his mind. Extraction, scenarios, contingency plans, risk assessments. The terrain offered both challenges and advantages. The remote location meant limited access routes, which simplified defense, but also restricted escape options if they were discovered. "Aaron will check the cabin," Dr. Coleman reported after ending her call. He was already in the field tracking a collared mountain lion near Blackwater Lake. He can reach the Martin property within 2 hours, verify occupancy without being detected, and report back. Good. James rubbed his face, the sleepless night catching up with him. Now we wait. The waiting proved more difficult than the planning. Dr. Coleman busied herself preparing food and checking on Luna and her pups. Noah alternated between napping on the small sofa and sitting silently with Luna, engaged in their mysterious, wordless communication. James fought against exhaustion, his body demanding rest while his mind raced with scenarios and contingency plans. 3 hours later, the satellite phone rang again. Dr. Coleman answered, listening intently before passing it to James. "It's Aaron." "This is James Blackwood," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm and steady. "Mr. Blackwood." The voice on the other end was deep and measured. "I've confirmed a woman and 2 wolves at the Martin cabin. The wolves match your description. 1 grey male with an injured leg, 1 wolf-dog hybrid pup. The woman fits your wife's description. Dark hair, mid-30s. She appeared alert but cautious, watching the surroundings carefully while collecting water from the spring. Relief flooded through James, so intense it made him light-headed. "Thank you. Did she see you?" "No. I observe without being observed. It's a skill my grandfather taught me." There was a hint of pride in Aaron's voice. "But there's something else you should know. There are others watching the cabin too." James's relief evaporated instantly. "What others?" "2 men in hunting gear, but they're not hunters. Wrong equipment, wrong movements. They're stationed on the North Ridge with high-powered optics, monitoring the cabin. They have communications equipment and sidearms under their jackets." "Reynolds's men," James concluded grimly. "Or Northland's. They found her. They're watching, but not approaching," Aaron continued, "like they're waiting for something or someone." "Backup," James surmised. "Or orders." He thought quickly. "Can you get a message to my wife without alerting the watchers?" There was a pause on the line. "Possibly. The spring is out of direct line of sight from their position. If she returns, they're at dusk, when visibility is poor. I might approach undetected. Tell her we're safe. Luna and the pups are with us at Dr. Coleman's research cabin. Tell her—" James hesitated, considering what information was critical. "Tell her the men claiming to be federal agents are imposters working with Reynolds. Tell her to trust no one except you, and that I'll send a secure extraction plan within 24 hours. "Understood," Aaron replied. "I'll maintain surveillance from a concealed position and update you if anything changes. These men will not approach your wife while I'm watching." The confidence in his statement was reassuring. "Thank you." After ending the call, James relayed the information to Dr. Coleman and Noah, careful to emphasize the positive. Elena was safe. Shadow and Scout were with her, while being honest about the danger. "The bad men found Mommy?" Noah asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. "They found the cabin. James corrected gently, but they're just watching from far away. They haven't approached, and Mr. Redhawk is going to help us get Mommy and the wolves to safety. Luna says we need to hurry, Noah said, his small face serious. Shadow's leg is hurting him again. He needs more medicine. Dr. Coleman frowned. The antibiotics I provided should last another 3 days. If he's showing signs of increased pain, the infection might be worsening despite treatment. We need a plan, James stated firmly. We can't wait 24 hours if Shadow's condition is deteriorating. I agree, Dr. Coleman said, but we need to be strategic. Those men watching the cabin surely have reinforcements nearby. A direct approach could trigger exactly what we're trying to avoid. A confrontation. James paced the small cabin, mind working through options and discarding them just as quickly. We need a diversion. Something to draw their attention away from the cabin long enough for Elena to escape with the wolves. The Forest Service conducts controlled burns in that sector periodically, Dr. Coleman suggested. We could report smoke in the area, trigger a routine inspection. Too slow and too unpredictable, James countered, and it might bring legitimate authorities into a potentially violent situation. I won't risk civilian lives. Noah, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. Luna says the forest can help us. Both adults turned to him. What does she mean, buddy? James asked. The forest has lots of animals, Noah explained. They can make the bad men look the wrong way. Luna says she can ask them to help through Shadow. Dr. Coleman looked skeptical. But James had witnessed too many impossible things in the past 24 hours to dismiss his son's suggestion outright. How would that work? He asked seriously. Noah's forehead wrinkled in concentration as he apparently conferred with Luna. Shadow would howl to call the other animals. Deer could run past the bad men. A bear lives near there. He could walk close to them. Birds could make loud noises in the wrong direction. He looked up at his father. The animals would scare the bad men and make them look away from Mommy. A wildlife diversion, Dr. Coleman murmured, sounding more intrigued than dismissive. It's not entirely implausible. Predator calls trigger predictable responses in prey species. A wolf howl would certainly cause deer movement, which could draw attention. But can Luna actually coordinate something like that through Shadow? James asked, still struggling with the concept despite everything he'd witnessed. I don't know, Dr. Coleman admitted. But I've seen enough in the last 24 hours to question many of my scientific assumptions. She turned to Noah. Can Luna really communicate with the bear? Different species don't typically cooperate like that. Not like talking, Noah clarified. More like asking. The bear doesn't like humans with guns. Luna can share that feeling with him through Shadow. James considered the bizarre plan. Under normal circumstances, he would have dismissed it as childish fantasy. But these circumstances were far from normal, and conventional approaches carried significant risks. Even if the wildlife diversion works, Elena would need to know exactly when to move and where to go, he pointed out. We'd need precise coordination. I can help with that part, Dr. Coleman offered. Aaron can deliver specific instructions along with basic supplies. I have emergency protocols established with him for research emergencies, hand signals, and timing markers that won't be detected by surveillance. As they discussed the details, James found himself crafting a plan that integrated military extraction tactics with his son's supernatural wildlife communication and Dr. Coleman's wilderness expertise. It was perhaps the strangest operation he had ever planned, but somehow it felt right, a perfect synthesis of their unique capabilities. "We'll need transportation waiting beyond the observer's position," James noted. "Something that can handle an injured wolf and move quickly through Forest Service roads. My research partner has a modified jeep designed for wildlife transport," Dr. Coleman suggested. "Reinforced cargo area, medical equipment on board, high clearance for rough terrain. Aaron can bring it in through the Western Service Road. It's longer but less visible from the watcher's position." James nodded, the plan taking shape in his mind. "If we time the wildlife diversion for dusk tomorrow, when visibility is poorest but there's still enough light to move safely, Elena could use the spring route to reach the Western Service Road. From there, Aaron could transport them here, and the bad men wouldn't see them leave," Noah concluded, clearly following the strategic discussion despite his young age. "That's the idea," James agreed, ruffling his son's hair. "But a lot depends on perfect timing and Luna's ability to communicate with Shadow and the other forest animals." Noah's expression turned solemn. "She can do it, Daddy. Shadow is her mate. They're connected like you and Mommy." The simple comparison struck James deeply. The bond between Luna and Shadow, mates, partners, co-parents, mirrored his relationship with Elena. Different species, same fundamental connection. It was both profound and oddly comforting. "All right then," he decided. "Let's finalize the details for Aaron. Dr. Coleman, what supplies will Elena need? We should include medication for Shadow in the package." As they assembled the emergency kit and drafted detailed instructions, James felt the familiar, focused calm of mission planning settle over him. This was far from the military operations he'd led in Afghanistan, but the core elements were the same. Assess the situation, identify resources, anticipate obstacles, coordinate precise timing. The satellite phone rang again, just as they were completing their preparations. Dr. Coleman answered, her expression growing increasingly concerned as she listened. "When?" she asked, her voice sharp. "How many?" Another pause. "Yes, I understand. Thank you for the warning." She hung up, turning to James with grim determination. "That was my contact at the Federal Wildlife Service. They've received intelligence that Northland Enterprises has deployed a private security team to this region, supposedly for a corporate retreat at one of their hunting lodges. 4 men heavily armed with military backgrounds, mercenaries," James translated, "looking for Luna and her pups. And likely for Noah as well, now that he's emerged as a complicating factor in their operation." Dr. Coleman's expression hardened. "They've been asking questions about unusual wolf sightings across the county. They'll find our location eventually." "Then we move up the timeline," James decided instantly. "Contact Aaron. Tell him we need the extraction tonight, not tomorrow, as soon as full darkness gives them cover." The wildlife diversion might be less effective at night, Dr. Coleman cautioned. "Maybe," James acknowledged, "but we've lost the luxury of perfect conditions. Northland's team will have thermal imaging, night vision, tracking equipment. The longer we wait, the higher the risk." The dawn broke over Dr. Coleman's cabin as Elena arrived with Shadow and Scout, the successful extraction behind them. Noah rushed to embrace his mother, while Luna greeted her mate with gentle nuzzles, their wolf family finally reunited. The pups tumbled playfully around Scout, who watched over them with surprising patience for one so young. When reports came that Northland's mercenaries had been arrested after following false trails left by Aaron and his tribal rangers, James felt the weight lifting from his shoulders. The legitimate Federal Wildlife Service had taken over the case, with Reynolds testifying against his employers in exchange for leniency. Dr. Coleman approached the Blackwoods with a proposal, a remote sanctuary for wolves on her private wilderness preserve, with Noah as a special consultant. His remarkable gift would help bridge understanding between humans and these misunderstood predators, while ensuring Luna's family remained protected but free. 6 months later, Luna's pups bounded across the sanctuary meadow under their mother's watchful eye. Shadow, his leg fully healed, patrolled the perimeter with Scout now nearly grown at his side. Noah sat cross-legged nearby, his silent communication with the wolves now accepted as extraordinary but real. "They're happy here," Noah told his parents, as they watched from the observation deck of their new home, adjacent to the sanctuary. "Luna says this is what freedom feels like." James wrapped an arm around Elena, marveling at how their lives had changed because of 3 chained wolves and their son's remarkable heart. Has an animal ever seemed to understand you in ways that defied explanation? Share your stories in the comments below. This tale of courage, connection, and understanding reminds us that some bonds transcend words. Like and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that will restore your faith in the special connection between humans and animals. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to never miss our newest uploads. The dawn broke over Dr. Coleman's cabin as Elena arrived with Shadow and Scout, the successful extraction behind them. Noah rushed to embrace his mother, while Luna greeted her mate with gentle nuzzles, their wolf family finally reunited. The pups tumbled playfully around Scout, who watched over them with surprising patience for one so young. When reports came that Northland's mercenaries had been arrested after following false trails left by Aaron and his tribal rangers, James felt the weight lifting from his shoulders. The legitimate Federal Wildlife Service had taken over the case, with Reynolds testifying against his employers in exchange for leniency. Dr. Coleman approached the Blackwoods with a proposal, a remote sanctuary for wolves on her private wilderness preserve, with Noah as a special consultant. His remarkable gift would help bridge understanding between humans and these misunderstood predators, while ensuring Luna's family remained protected but free. 6 months later, Luna's pups bounded across the sanctuary meadow under their mother's watchful eye. Shadow, his leg fully healed, patrolled the perimeter with Scout now nearly grown at his side. Noah sat cross-legged nearby, his silent communication with the wolves now accepted as extraordinary but real. "They're happy here," Noah told his parents, as they watched from the observation deck of their new home, adjacent to the sanctuary. "Luna says this is what freedom feels like." James wrapped an arm around Elena, marveling at how their lives had changed because of 3 chained wolves and their son's remarkable heart. Has an animal ever seemed to understand you in ways that defied explanation? Share your stories in the comments below. This tale of courage, connection, and understanding reminds us that some bonds transcend words. Like and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that will restore your faith in the special connection between humans and animals. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to never miss our newest uploads.